Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Guidance Corner. My name is Christelle, and this week's discussion, we're going to talk about boundaries. Boundaries. Oh my gosh. When I hear people talk about boundaries often, I get very triggered. So, this is a topic that I can admit triggers me. So, let's see how we go with it. So, boundaries. Why does it trigger me? Because so many times we talk about setting boundaries, and really what we're doing is exerting control or building walls. We're not actually setting boundaries at all. And I think there's this really big misconception of what a boundary is. Even the word boundary, I almost wish we need to create another word for it, because boundary is a boundary. A boundary stops us from entering. A boundary stops us from exploring. And a boundary feels very definite. There's no flexibility in a boundary. But when we talk about setting boundaries, it's actually very different. And I really, really want to stress here that it's not a wall and it has nothing to do with control. You might actually be very surprised with what a boundary actually is and why we use them or need to use them. So I talked about boundaries in our last discussion, and I felt, oh, this is a topic I'm going to need to discuss sooner rather than later. And there are so many topics like this, because when I mention things in other discussions, I don't want to water down the discussion that I'm actually talking about. So make too many side points, because then we get a little bit lost. I want to keep it on the discussion. But sometimes without a bit of understanding in those other topics, we can get a little bit lost in that discussion. So boundaries, I really, really wanted to do this discussion and to really assist you in setting healthy boundaries and even understanding what a boundary is. So I'm going to jump straight in by first acknowledging what is a boundary and why should we use them? What is their purpose? So a healthy boundary, the way we should use boundaries and the way we should imagine a boundary to be, is an expression of who we are. It expresses our vulnerability and also what our values and beliefs are. A boundary is set around our values, our beliefs, and who we are. The purpose of setting a boundary is so that we align with our outer world, or we allow our outer world to align with us. That's a boundary. So a boundary is all about alignment. So do you know your alignment? Do you know your values and your beliefs? Do you and can you see your vulnerabilities? Because without this alignment, we actually can't set a boundary. I want that to sink in a little bit at the moment. Okay, because a boundary is not to push away. We set boundaries to enable what is for us to flow in, and what isn't to either not be attracted to our energy or to come and then to be released, to just go. There are so many people situations, different aspects of our life that come in and then just leave. And we almost don't give them a second thought because it happens so naturally. There isn't when that happens, we are in alignment. There is an aspect of us that is aligned. You think of all the people we talk to. We don't want to be friends with all of them. We don't draw all of them in. Sometimes they serve their purpose, like when we're shopping or in our jobs, when we interact with others. So people come, people go, situations come, situations go. There's an alignment there that happens naturally that we don't even think about. Because those people are not part of our circle, or we're not trying to draw them in. We're not trying to make them part of our circle. So the boundaries happen naturally. We might suddenly meet somebody and think, oh, I don't like you. Not for any reason. We don't know that person. There's just not an alignment there. And if we're in alignment and we're allowing the flow, we just let that happen. We don't even read anything into it. So boundaries is an expression of who we are and of what we are going to align with. That's very different from the building the walls or the setting the ultimatums, trying to control things. So what does a healthy boundary look like? A healthy boundary is soft. It has compromise. It lacks the need to control. It doesn't come from a place of fear. It comes from a place of being. This is who we are. So a healthy boundary is set by saying things like, I need. It's about the I. It's a conversation, a discussion based on flexibility, understanding, compassion. And it allows for discussion. It is a discussion. It's not a line in the sand like so many of us see it. A boundary is a discussion because it leads somewhere. A wall doesn't lead anything, doesn't lead anywhere, sorry. A wall is just it. If anything, it blocks the path. A boundary, when we set our boundaries, it opens the path. It allows people to go. It allows people to come. So a boundary is very open because a boundary helps understanding and knowing to come in. We express who we are in a boundary. So what does an unhealthy boundary look like? Well, for starters, an unhealthy boundary starts with you must, or you need to do this, or not do this. It starts with the you. An unhealthy boundary puts something, constraints, restrictions on another. It doesn't talk about what the individual needs. It talks about what the other person can or cannot do. So an unhealthy boundary is limiting. It has constraints. It almost has a feeling of an ultimatum. If you do this, this will happen. So it's controlling. Our focus is outward on another or on a situation. Whereas a healthy boundary looks in. It's about us. What do we need? And I think there's a third boundary that we need to look at as well that doesn't really fall into the first two. It can fall into an unhealthy boundary because it is an unhealthy boundary, but I want to separate it because it's different again. And this one is something we all do. It's the boundaries that build walls. Okay, so an unhealthy boundary, the way I described that, was more trying to control somebody else or a situation. Boundaries that build walls are made out of fear. So they don't show us our authenticity. They don't show us our values and our beliefs. They show us our fears. So when we're building walls and we're using boundaries to build those walls, we're actually showing ourselves what we fear. So what does that type of boundary look like? That type of boundary would look insurmountable. Okay, so we're going to set a boundary that we know the other person's not going to be able to meet, or that job won't be able to meet. And therefore, it lets us off the hook. And then it's the fault of the person or the job or the situation. So, for instance, a boundary that builds walls might be somebody saying, I only date this type of person that has this type of lifestyle, that has this type of look, that has this type of background. So the wall is we're making the pool that we will date tiny. And we'll still go on dates and we'll still say, oh, yeah, I've been on a date. Oh, no, he wasn't acceptable. She wasn't acceptable at all. You know, I have my boundaries. But it's not a healthy boundary. It's a wall that you have built. And we do that for jobs, whatever shows us our fears, we can build boundaries on. And then the boundary is almost the thing that lets us off the hook. No, I haven't built a wall. I just have standards. I have my boundaries. So take a moment, and as usual, I will do journaling worksheets, the meditation, the blog, all the free resources that you can access. But please use those, because in the journaling worksheet, I will discuss the three different types of boundaries that I've just talked about: the healthy boundary, the unhealthy boundary, and the boundary that builds walls. So you can see, where are your boundaries built? What are you trying to achieve by setting these boundaries? And are they really boundaries at all, in the sense of a healthy boundary? When we set in boundaries, what they should actually look like? Or are they the unhealthy boundaries, the ones that fall into control and ultimatums, and the ones that build those walls? So before we set boundaries, there are some questions that we need to ask ourselves, just so we can make sure that we are setting boundaries, not taking control, not suppressing somebody else's being, not building walls, but actually setting boundaries that shows who we are, setting boundaries that will enable us to align. And actually, sorry, let me rephrase that. That will allow the outer world to align with us. So the first one I want you to ask yourself is, what is your end result? What do you want this boundary to achieve? And all the questions are important, but this is the most important. Because let's have a look at a relationship, okay? A romantic relationship. We want to set a boundary with our partner. Asking this question shows us, where are we building this boundary from and to what end? So, what is the outcome that we are trying to achieve by setting this boundary? Because the way we set it is determined on what we're trying to achieve. So let's go to this romantic relationship so you can get a bit of an idea of what this can look like. A boundary is to align with our authentic self, with our values and our beliefs and what we need in the moment. So if you are trying to end this relationship, you can do that by setting unhealthy boundaries. You can do that by setting a boundary, a wall boundary that is so high, you know that your partner won't be able to meet it. And there'll be more conflict, and eventually you can blame it on the escalating conflict and the relationship ends. Or they can say, you're so unreasonable, I don't even know what I'm doing, and they can exit the relationship. But if you're coming at this from a healthy boundary will look like, this relationship no longer sits well with me. This relationship, I feel it falling away. I feel that it needs to fall away is probably a better way of saying it. And I'm not to say this is how you would say it, but this is because we each have our different ways of expressing ourselves that are unique to us. But this is to give you an idea of what it would look like. So setting a boundary can be, I need this relationship to end. Now, I know we don't often look at boundaries that way. We look at boundaries as in something that the other needs to meet. But sometimes what the other needs to meet is an ending. This is why boundaries are not about the other person. They're about us. And when we make them about us, one, we're more honest. We see and understand, and even if it's painful and difficult, we acknowledge what we're really after. The first ways of setting the boundaries in this relationship took the emphasis off us, almost like we could blame something else. We could push somebody to break it off, and then we could blame them. Or we could make the boundary wall so high that it just increased the conflict until it reached, we're done. But that's not honest. And that's not setting a boundary that aligns with us. The end results are still the same. But if we acknowledged that end result before creating the boundary, we really would go with the healthy boundary because we understand what we need, the relationship to end. Same thing if we want the relationship to grow and to build. It's not an ultimatum that will achieve that. It's not building a wall so high that your partner can't reach it, can't attain it, they might try, but you're setting them up to fail, and they will feel that. And that's very destructive for a relationship and for the other person. They feel themselves failing. And then you can blame them because they have failed. So it's very heavy. It's a very unhelpful energy. A healthy boundary, if we wanted to save our relationship, might be, this is what I need moving forward. A healthy boundary might even ask the other person, what do you need? Are they still in alignment? Because sometimes Relationships end not because we don't love that person anymore. The love might still be there, but maybe our paths are so different that they don't align anymore. One's going off in this direction, one's going off in that direction, and that can be life. And forcing to try to stay together can be quite hurtful. But it doesn't mean the love's gone. That can be quite difficult. But that's healthy boundaries will enable us to establish if we have parted on different paths. Another question that is quite difficult to answer is, how will we reinforce this boundary? Okay, so if we've said to somebody, this is what I need, what happens when they respond? We don't know how they're going to respond. So what if they say, oh, look, I can work with that. I just need this. So then there's a bit of a compromise. Can you compromise? If they say, no, I can't give you that, what are you prepared to do? And I think before you go in with your boundary, this is really important. It's like, I'm going to use it as a analogy, but going to an auction to buy a home when you don't know what your limit is dangerous. You can put yourself in all sorts of trouble. So you know what you're prepared to spend. You have a boundary. So you know the end result. That's the amount that you're prepared to spend. And then how will you reinforce that? Is when you hit that budget, you no longer put your paddle up. You no longer bid. I couldn't think of the word. You no longer bid. You stop. And yes, that means you lose maybe the house of your dreams. But it is so important to know, how will we reinforce this boundary? Because without knowing that, setting the boundary itself is almost pointless. Another very interesting question that we can ask is, are we setting a boundary when we need to be? Okay, so let's imagine ourselves on a first date. If we already have boundaries in place, they could likely be walls. We might have a few boundaries just in the way the person might talk to us or address us. But anything beyond that, when we don't even know this person in front of us, we don't even know how we feel about them, there's a sense that the more open we can be, the more probably authentic we are being. If we come into new situations already with a ton of boundaries, they're probably more likely to be walls. So this one is a bit nuanced. So you will need to maybe just be a little bit more aware of it. But when we're entering new situations, when we're entering new jobs or new living environments, anything like that, we just want to be mindful of, are we coming into it with a bunch of boundaries? Because the person or the situation is unknown. So we can't actually have that many boundaries in place yet because we don't even know what we're interacting with yet. So just be very mindful of that. Another thing we need to ask ourselves as well is, who are we interacting with? What is the situation? Who is the person? Are we setting a boundary with somebody that can understand it, with somebody who can meet it? Okay, so somebody who is maybe experiencing great upheaval in their life. They might just be going through one of those really difficult points in their life. They might have had a loss of a family member or friend, or they might be struggling with addictions, or they just might not be in a great place. Okay, is that person even going to be in a place of receptiveness to actually, for you to actually even discuss boundaries? Okay, why is that important to realize? Why is that an important question to ask yourself? Is because you can say, I need this, but maybe their needs are so big. Um, they're in survival mode that they can't even think about you because they are so lost within just keeping their own head above water. So, depending on the situation, sometimes it's not a boundary that you need to set. Sometimes you just need to walk away. Or sometimes, depending on the situation, because everything's very different, sometimes you just need to be and support, again, depending on the situation. So, that's a very mindful way of interacting with whoever you're interacting with. It's the same. You're going to set a boundary with a colleague and say, I only expect this and I only expect that. And really, they have no power in it. You might set a boundary with your manager, but your manager is locked into what the boss is telling them to do. So the manager actually has no power to set your boundary, to be able to acknowledge it even. So there is this, really want to say, before we even set boundaries, we really do need to look into it quite a bit. And I think it's something that most of us never really do. And then we wonder why these boundaries don't work or they backfire. And then finally, this one reflects setting a bad or a negative boundary is, are we setting this boundary to control? Are we trying to exert our power onto somebody else by setting this boundary? Okay, so the boundary is going to come at the other person like, you need to stop doing this. You need to start doing this. Okay, so it controls how the other person interacts when you haven't even spoken about yourself. A healthy boundary is, I need, and then an explanation of what you need, and perhaps even why you need it. Again, every situation will be different, but a healthy boundary starts with, I need. So I hope this discussion on boundaries has opened up like a whole other world of what boundaries are. And I hope that as a society, we start to use boundaries differently. We're not controlling. We're not giving ultimatums. We're not building walls. We're aligning with what is meant for us. When we set a boundary, we're calling in what aligns with us and letting go with what doesn't. So I'm going to leave it there. I wish you a wonderful week. See you in the next discussion. Bye-bye.